So dudes, welcome to the Gregor Gaming Experience. Today, I'm going to be talking about Attacker Repick. I have compiled arguments for it, against it, and points of discussion from the article discussing it more in detail. This video will not be talking about the new TDM mode. That will be talked about in a separate video because I believe Attacker Repick deserves its own video for discussion about it. Forward, I'm not a fan of this in its current state. I think there are other ways to accomplish what Attacker Repick sets out to do, but this video isn't meant to argue with people in a toxic way. This is just me giving my points and trying to do it in a legible manner. So the reason that Attacker Repick is getting implemented here is because the game is very defender-sided. And there are pick rates for a lot of different attackers in the game, as we already know, that are quite low. And the variety on that side of the aisle isn't much higher compared to defense. It's actually pretty bad. You pretty much have a stalwart sort of meta with at least one hard breacher, at least one soft breach, and at least one kind of entry frag, usually somebody with frag grenades, to get rid of defender utility. I think there are other ways to do this, like I said, to make this less restrictive for attackers. Again, we'll get to those in a minute. The other argument for it is that it reduces downtime, enhancing the player experience. Personally, I feel like downtime is a somewhat subjective measurement in terms of player enjoyment, but more on that later. Like I said, I'm not a fan of this change. Here are the reasons why. One, I think it lowers the skill gap. I think it lowers the skill gap because it removes the skill-based aspect of picking operators, and it also removes the skill-based aspect of site selection for the defense. Because it makes site choice irrelevant. It's going to remove, in my opinion, theoretically, I think it's going to remove the incentive to play quote-unquote off sites, sites that aren't as reliable in terms of win rate, but with enough strategizing and with enough planning and good enough execution, you can throw off an attacker lineup that is meant for one particular site by going to a quote-unquote bad site instead. The reason sites are bad in Rainbow Six Siege is usually because there are lots of different entry paths that defenders have to be mindful of. So they are at a distinct gunfighting disadvantage compared to other sites that are a lot more funneled and a lot more easy to defend in terms of gunfighting. It also removes an incentive for learning maps because if you can just pick whatever attackers you want, then you don't have to have any map knowledge because you would know what operators to bring if you had map knowledge. Now, you don't need map knowledge. You can just pick a different attacker. So the article, I've read the whole thing, and I think I have a general idea of where Ubisoft is coming from here. My issue with it is that I think this is an idea that sounds good on paper, but I believe that there are points of contention here in terms of the argumentation that are being done that ignore the bigger picture of how Rainbow Six Siege match plays out. The first point, there's a lot left up to guesswork for attackers, and we want to even that playing field a little bit. And we're going to do that with the Attacker Repick feature. Now, why is there guesswork involved? Well, there's guesswork involved because what they're referring to is that before the game starts, you have no idea what site the defenders are going to go, and you have to make a decision on your attacking loadout based off of this. In some ways, this is why the attacking meta is so rigid, and this is why we have like a pool of operators towards the top in terms of pick rates that hasn't really deviated that much. The problem with this way of thinking, though, in my opinion, is that it removes the concept that these operator picks are done because we just kind of felt like it. These operator picks are usually done because of map knowledge. Going into a match, you have to guess what site the defenders are going to play. In order to guess what site the defenders are going to play, you have to have knowledge of the individual sites. What makes those sites so powerful? What kinds of operators are the defenders going to bring? The attackers don't know what the defenders are going to bring. The defenders don't know what the attackers are going to bring. Right? So there's a little bit of give and take here. The defenders can play a mind game with the attackers, and it's up to the attackers to solve that mind game. If the defenders decide to play a mind game on a site that sucks and they screw it up, that's on them. If the attackers decide to take a risk by bringing an operator that doesn't have a certain kind of piece of utility, and they go to a site where it turns out they're actually going to this site instead, then that's a decision that the defenders made to fake out the attackers. It wasn't done arbitrarily. Attackers have something called a gadget to help out with this guesswork. It's a drone. Only attackers have drones. Defenders have static intel gathering devices like cameras, and Mozzie can collect drones, but drones are unique to attackers, and they get 10 of them, 2 to each person. Twitch, in particular, has a drone that can deal with defender utility. Flores has a drone that can blow up defender utility. There is something involved in the drone game that is skill-based. The more skilled you are at droning, the more knowledge you have of particular drone locations, places that you can put your drone for passive spotting that hold crosses and flanks. These are things that support characters are very good and suited to do. These are things that support players thrive off of. This kind of map knowledge. Different strengths on a team, on an attacking team. This guy's good at aiming. This guy's got pretty good map knowledge. Things like this kind of balance each other out. So you're going to have more guesswork with the drone if you suck at droning and you get it shot all the time. That's just the nature of it. If you don't suck at drone work, you're going to be more conservative with them. You're going to know the spots where they can hide, and you're going to get more intel out of it. Droning is an integrally skilled part of Siege. It doesn't show up on the scoreboard, but it's there. Another point. It's no surprise that defenders already have quite a large advantage in many situations in Siege, thanks to their ability to build a team that's tailored to that specific situation. Okay, I have a number of issues with this particular comment. So, for starters, defenders in any tac shooter have a defensive advantage. Here are some stats from recent lands done in CSGO 2021. All of these maps, that blue there, that's CT sighted for lands. I'm not talking about random matchmaking games here. LAN events where people are playing for money. All of them are defender sighted. Same case with Valorant, especially with the amount of util in that game. Why is this the case? Well, why was it difficult to invade Normandy? It's because in a environment like this, it is easier to react to decisions in a strategy-based aspect. It is easier to react to decisions based off because they're revealing their card, right? They're revealing their card to you, and you can take that information and react to it without revealing your card. Especially in a shooter game, there are tactical advantages to defending that you're just not going to be able to find a way to really find a way to turn around without making it unnecessarily unfair for the defense. In terms of gunfighting, the defense can hold an ang and then back off if they have to. They can react to people peeking something. In order to make it more difficult for defenders, attackers have drones, and they can get that information and then attack defenders from positions that they're not going to be aware of because they don't know that somebody is gathering intelligence on them. So this idea that Siege is unique in terms of how defender-sided it is, maybe. But the idea that Siege is unique because it has defender-sided rounds is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Every tac shooter is defender-sided. That's how tac shooters work. Defenders don't get much out of that tactical advantage of being able to pick operators for a site unless you and your teammates are working together to come up with a strat for that site. Especially if it's an off-pick site that conventionally kind of stinks, like that split site that you have on Consulate, where you have tellers below and then the basement site with the server stack. Site selection is an integrally skill-based aspect of Siege. Coming up with strategies for individual sites with your teammates, picking certain kinds of operators involves game knowledge. It involves prior planning. And that prior planning is game knowledge that the attackers have to adapt to. They have to adapt to this by gathering intel. If they gather the intel and they don't know what the hell to do with it, that's not your fault. That's their fault. Picking a strong site doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win that site. In fact, that removes a little bit of outplay potential in some ways for the defense, because if the defense happens to lose a quote-unquote good site, they can't mix things up a little bit. They can't play this mind game. Do you go back to that original site because it's so good, or do you go somewhere else because it's quite, not as good in terms of holding it for gunfights. The attackers used to have to make decisions based off of this. Okay, are they going to bluff and then go to a different site here? Or are they going to stick to their guns and then really try to hold this down? What if that round was won by a very slim margin? Then you can predict, okay, I think that these guys are going to go here again because it was pretty close. And honestly, there were just a couple of things that were keeping us from losing that round. So I think they're confident about that, and they're going to go there. Let's bring that same operator comp. Or let's not bring that same operator comp. Let's do something different to throw them off. There's little mind games that happen that you don't see on the screen. This is true of any competitive sport. It's true for Siege. Our intention with Attacker Repick is to make the prep phase equally engaging and meaningful to both sides. I don't know what the heck this means. Site selection for the defense becomes less meaningful as a result of this change, and the attackers get to enjoy the full benefit of it. There's no downside to this for the attackers. It just makes it more difficult to defend. That's it. How does it make it more meaningful for defense? It doesn't. We want to encourage a similar level of creative expression among attackers. It's going to be extremely difficult to give attackers the same level of creative expression. The only way that I think you can give them that creative expression, I think what they mean here is this idea that before the game starts, is if operators are able to move around on attack during the prep phase. I actually think this would be a pretty decent idea. I think if we move to something like Siege 2, and then we kind of restructure the maps and restructure the engine and make these things possible, I think that we could make Siege into something similar to like a football game. You have a line of scrimmage, defense and attack are able to, defense and attack, defense and offense is what I should say. Defense and offense are able to adapt to each other's movements and come up with plans before the snap of the ball. That's the indicator at which the play takes place. Valorant does this with a barrier phase where you can set down the util and then decide what you're going to do before the snap. With attack, you could probably do something like this where you can gather intel and then maybe have like a barrier outside the building. Just something to think about. When that timer goes up, then the attackers can move off of the intel that they've gathered. That would, probably allow for a little bit more creative expression. Because the reason defenders have that creative expression is the ability to run around the map and set it up. But like I say in my cliff notes here, this is just an idea, and doing this is going to require you to completely reformat the game. So I don't know how this increases creative expression for attackers. If anything, it just reduces it for defenders and then ends up giving attackers this free ability to adapt on the fly to a cohesive plan that the defense has put together. Doesn't make sense. If you decide to risk your drones to identify the enemy team's operator picks, you should be able to do something meaningful with that intel. There are ways to drone for operator picks and guess operator picks without giving up the drone. If you're giving up your drone just to see operator picks and you're not using that drone to figure out what the defense is doing, and you're throwing your drones willy-nilly and getting them shot, that's bad droning. This is reducing the skill gap. You reduce the weight of losing a drone because you really want to know what operator that is. That reduces the skill gap. We're also interested to see how this affects jack-of-all-trades operators, as we expect this new feature to open the door to more specialized operators who previously weren't considered worth the risk without clear intel. The reason that jack-of-all-trades operators are so necessary on attack is because the game sandbox is tailored to it. The game sandbox completely revolves around defender places down bulletproof thing, attacker has to throw explodey thing at it to get rid of it. That's why Jaeger's pick rate is so high. That's why Wamai and Aruni's pick rates are so high. If anything, what this is going to do is it's going to let attackers bring more jack-of-all-trades operators that are just more jack-of-all-tradesier to deal with the util that they see. It's not like they're going to see something and then go, oh yeah, now I can bring Dokkaebi. Oh yeah, now I can bring Amaru. Now I can bring Nuck, or all these other operators that don't have any useful utility. They're just going to bring another useful util operator that's going to do the same job more effectively and then make the job of the defenders more difficult. If anything, I think on paper, this is going to make defenders have to bring jack-of-all-trades operators. They're not going to be able to do pocket picks anymore. It will further cement this whole Jaeger and friends versus frag grenades meta that people are already complaining about. It really feels like secondary gadgets have become more important than primary gadgets at this point, especially for attackers, because anytime an attacker stinks, we just give them this new can opener hard breach gadget, Oregon 6, and then they can do the same thing as everybody else can. And then for Pro League, we're removing 6-pick and reveal phase. Now, I didn't play in Pro League. I played in a couple of 10-mans, and I played some Go4 games. And this seemed like a pretty simple solution of making the game less defender-sided because it gave both attackers and defenders a fair assessment of what each other was going to bring. It didn't reveal everything. It didn't reveal gadget placement. It didn't reveal reinforcements. It didn't reveal rotates. There's default rotates and reinforcements. But it didn't show you everything. It just showed you just enough to come up with something to see to counteract the strategy of the other team. Now that this isn't here anymore, because it adds too much downtime, that we're just going to completely move to a completely new system that hasn't been tested yet, that was working fine for 5 years. Why? I can't think of a reason. I can't think of a reason why. And on a personal note, talking more about downtime, I really feel like the downtime thing is an overblown talking point. I have occasionally had a problem with Siege's downtime in terms of my streaming experience, because it's boring to die and then sit around. But there's a thing that Siege has that no other game has when you die, and that's gameplay after death. Getting on cameras, getting on drones, listening, giving callouts. There's dynamics of gameplay after death that no other game has. So I think this idea that Siege has downtime when you die is misplaced, and in a lot of cases, not true. Get the fuck off your phone and give callouts to your teammates. Oh, well, people don't want to give callouts to teammates. There's probably a number of different reasons why that's the case. Maybe one of the reasons for that is because they have this magic button they can hit on their keyboard that goes bloom, bloom. Oh, he's over there, dude. Bloom, bloom. They don't have to actually give a call out. They don't have to actually give useful intel. There's all these outs. There's all these outs that people have been given that are reducing skill gap, that are lowering incentives to learn maps. Map content on YouTube does why? Because there's no incentive to. There's no incentive to learn. Especially with one-shot headshot, laser beam guns. Everybody just kind of sprays a head level. That's the game right now in ranked. And it wasn't always that way. Let me know what you guys think about Attacker Repick in the comments down below. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the TDM mode in a future video. Deuces.